Bueno, estamos acá con Noam Chomsky, quien no necesita presentación para nuestros lectores. Con Jacobin vinimos a San Pablo para cubrir el proceso electoral de segunda vuelta. The first question is this. The extreme right has eventually become a global phenomenon. Trump, Le Pen, Orban. How do you read this phenomenon? What is the specificity of bolsonarism in this context for you?
Well, you're right to stress the word specificity. There is a very general phenomenon worldwide, but if we look closely, there are very specific reasons, background in particular countries. The general phenomenon, I think, is a reaction of the business world to the social democratic tendencies that began partly in the 1930s, the New Deal in the United States, the social democratic policies after the Second World War. The Depression and the war had led to a wave of radical democracy over much of the world. In fact, a lot of the early activities of the US and British forces when they entered continental Europe was to crush the partisans, the worker-based society that they had created and so on, and to restore the traditional order. But nevertheless, there was a compromise. Fascist collaborators were reinstated, but there was still so much popular pressure that there were extensive social democratic measures. Same in the United States, lasted through the 1960s. The business world was strongly opposed and was doing what it could to restore the kind of control that they had pretty much in the 1920s. Well, finally, the dam broke in 1970s. Reagan and Thatcher, others came along. And what we've lived through for the last 40 years is a major class war, militant class war, to restore the domination of the masters of the economy. Reagan and Thatcher understood very well that in order to carry out a major class war against working people, you had to destroy their organizations. So their first actions were a major attack on labor unions that opened the door to the corporate sector to carry out union breaking, organization breaking efforts, most of them illegal, but it didn't matter when you have a criminal state that says, go ahead. It's extended under Clinton. Could go into the details if we had time. Similar things elsewhere. In some countries more or less held on, others not. But this phenomenon was pretty much everywhere with particularities in particular countries. Well, one of the effects is you have a population, large part of the population, which is angry, properly, full of contempt for institutions, hates everything, doesn't trust anything, resentful of what are called elites, the people they see, not the powers behind them. And there's nobody there to protect them. The Democrats abandoned, in the United States, abandoned any commitment to the working class back in the 1970s, became a party of affluent professionals, kind of people who show up at Obama's fancy parties. In Britain, New Labour became the same when there was an attempt to reverse it under Corbyn. It was smashed. He was, in fact, essentially expelled from the party. Similar things elsewhere. that's perfect terrain for demagogues, people who can come and say, with one hand, hold up a banner saying, I love you, I'm going to save you. Other hand, stab him in the back. It's Trump. Counterparts elsewhere, always. And I should say that one thing that the Republican Party pioneered, now it's all over the world, Orban's Hungary, Bolsonaro's Brazil, everywhere, is recognition that you can, in a population that's not organized to protect itself, you can gain popular support by shifting attention away from the economic issues where you're stabbing them in the back. You don't want to talk about that. Shift to what are called cultural issues. With Richard Nixon, early 1970s, he initiated it with the so-called Southern strategy. Since the Democrats were supporting civil rights, Republicans will be racists. You don't say I'm a racist. It's hidden in various ways, but it becomes very clear. Under Reagan, it didn't have to be hidden. It was an overt racist. The other thing you can seize upon is what are called traditional cultural values, especially sexual orientation, gender orientation. So let's carry out a war against the woke culture, which is trying to turn our children into sex monsters or groom them for, sexual abuse and so on. That really catches lots of people. One development in parallel to this was the development of popular organizations, which did offer the targets of the war something. Evangelical Church is the main one. It does offer people something. You join the church, at least there's some hope, maybe after the second coming. And in the absence of organized labor, largely crushed, this appeals to people. And of course, it's deeply reactionary. They can pick up on the so-called cultural issues. You see this very clearly in country after country. It's, all of that lays the basis for a right-wing revival. And it's organized. Well, in one form or another, that's taking place everywhere. You just saw it dramatically in Brazil with the former minister of family, now a senator, giving this speech about how the PT is taking out the teeth of children so they can take part in oral sex and on and on. Well, why do people listen to that? Because their lives are falling apart. There's nothing else for them. There's no counterforce. So at least this offers something. We do love our children. We don't want them to be subject to this. Well, that's, you look back to fascism in the 20s and 30s, some similarities.
Noam, thank you very much for the first answer, and continuing with some things you are telling us. In this dramatic week, we are starting to transit. In the 8th of November, we have election in the US, and most likely there will be a victory of the Republican Party, dominated by Trump. How do you analyze the political dynamics in the US? And do you think there can be analogies with the situation of bolsonarism here in Brazil, considering that he have accumulated a great social and institutional power, as we could see in the first round of elections here?
Well, here again, it's worth looking closely. So let's take the election coming out in the United States. You look at what the issues are, extensive polling, we know what bothers people. Top issue is the economy and inflation. What's the story about inflation? It's true that prices are going up, but wages have gone up even faster. You don't talk about that. You can see what's in people's minds. I go into the store, I have to pay more than I paid a couple of years ago. What about the fact that your wages are higher? Well, you don't really see that. That's something that just happens slowly over time. So you don't see the fact that you're actually better off than you were. In fact, that's particularly true among the lower half of the population. The Biden is no great progressive, but the fact is that the Biden programs did lead to a recovery of jobs, of wages, particularly among the poor. That's not visible. What's visible is I'm paying more than I did yesterday. Well, now we come with the media. What do you read in the media? Nothing about the material improvement, only inflation. Yes, the terrible thing is inflation, which is a problem. But in fact, if you put it against the background, it's not the problem. And what you have now is the central bank, Federal Reserve, moving to increase unemployment. That's what it means when you raise interest rates. Raising interest rates means purposeful increasing unemployment to keep wages down. It'll also have an effect on inflation. And you can read about this in the Economic Policy Institute or some economists like Dean Baker pointed out. But it's not what you hear. And since there is no organized labor to combat it, that's been smashed. There's no political party that brings it forward. There are elements in the Sanders movement, but they're marginalized. What you have is a population that thinks we're being destroyed by the inflation. And then comes the Republican Party line. That's because they're giving all their money to immigrants and to Black people and poor people, and the usual line. You see similar things in Brazil. That's with the genius of the Thatcher-Reagan policies was not only to open the floodgates to robbery, but also to destroy the organizations that could defend people against them, basically labor unions. That 1-2 punch has opened the way to savage class war taking different forms in different countries. And you see it in Brazil in its own particular way.
No, okay, but how do you see an still hypothetical government of Lula with the alliances needed to win the election, the relationship with the social movement? How do you see the future government as a response to the extreme right we are fighting?
We'll see. Could be. It's a very uncertain period coming. Among Bolsonaro supporters, to the extent that you can believe the media reports, including foreign media like the London Financial Times, what they are reporting is that a majority of Bolsonaro supporters are saying that if the election is stolen, which means we didn't win, so if the election is stolen, we'll be out in the streets. We can't let that happen. We've seen what happened in the United States. It's a model. The thesis that the election was stolen, was utterly fraudulent, has taken over. The Republican Party large majority of Republican voters believe the election was stolen. A large number of legislators who are running in the current election will probably be elected, say the election was stolen. Biden is not the legitimate president. That hasn't happened in functioning democracies for far back as you can remember. This is part of a large attack on democracy. Actually, Bolsonaro has been preparing for it for years with the attacks on the integrity of the electoral process. It's been right up front, nothing secret about it, even calling in the ambassadors of that the election is going to be stolen. It shocked the international diplomatic corps. But this is all preparation in case he doesn't win, meaning the election was stolen. Let's get the mobs out in the street. In the United States on January 6th, came very close to a coup, very close. A couple of people had decided differently, might have overturned the government. And now the Republican Party quite openly is pressing measures to prevent the popular vote from determining the election. The Supreme Court, which has been packed with ultra-right judges, is now taking up a case which is just shocking the legal profession. The fact that even they're taking it up is amazing. It's a case which is so ludicrous that it's been regarded as, the idea has been around for a long time, but it's been regarded as totally ludicrous. Basic idea is that state legislatures can overturn the election. Technically, that's possible because of the way the Electoral College works. Technically, a state legislature could say, we reject the popular vote and we pick the electors. It is theoretically possible. It's kind of a flaw in the Constitution, which has been known for centuries, but considered so exotic, nobody even paid attention. Now the Supreme Court decided to take that up. Already shocking that they're even looking at it. What'll be more shocking will be their decision coming up soon. I'm sure they're not going to be brazen enough just to accept it. What they'll probably do is produce a partial, a complex, hidden legalese, partial support for it, which can be used as a precedent by later courts to carry it through. That's the way these judicial coups are carried out. But all of this is part of an attempt to undermine popular democracy, which is already very fragile. When you talk about democracy in a country like the United States, it's a very frail instrument. So, for example, the United States happens to be very well studied and it's well established by mainstream political scientists that most of the population is just underrepresented, meaning their own representatives don't pay attention to the opinions of the voters, large majority. That's not democracy. And the strong, very strong evidence showing that elections are basically bought. You can predict the outcome remarkably closely just by campaign funding, you know where that comes from. So it's a frail democracy to begin with, and this may be the final blow. We're moving towards that. So it's not going to be 1930s fascism, but a kind of proto-fascism, which has many of the same characteristics, but doesn't have extermination camps.
Okay. So Noam, thank you very, very much. Are you in the States or are you in Brazil right now? Yeah, you.
Am I?
Yeah.
My wife, Valeria, is Brazilian, and she's here for the election and see her family, and I'm here doing things like this. But we'll go back after the election.
Okay, thank you very much, and we hope we can celebrate the results?
It'll be difficult. I mean, even if Lula wins and there's no mass violence, he's going to have a very hard time moving. The Congress is right-wing. His right-wing supporters are going to demand positions in the government. It's going to be very hard to move. Fortunately, Brazil does have major popular movements, like the MST, for example, most important popular movement in the world. Maybe they can get together.
Hope so.
We'll see.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you.
Good job.